Today we're going to talk about common cognitive distortions and how to overcome them. If you're a coach, consultant, or well-being entrepreneur, grab free science-based content to grow your business by clicking the ebook link in the description below. What are cognitive distortions? Cognitive distortions are unrealistic or irrational thoughts. Typically, they are exaggerated and negative perceptions of our lives or the world. All of us experience cognitive distortions. In fact, they are so common and unavoidable that therapists often call them automatic thoughts. Sometimes we can catch a cognitive distortion as it is happening, or recognize it in hindsight. Often we carry on with our lives without recognizing the inaccuracy of the thought. However, the more we can bring awareness to our cognitive distortions, the easier they are to overcome, enabling us to experience the joy of life without the negative cloak that our mind lays upon it. So, what are the causes of cognitive distortions? We humans have evolved to make quick decisions about whether we are safe, so we can take quick action to protect ourselves. So our brains evolved to bypass slow, logical thinking when immediate gut reactions are required. This is especially true when our brains aren't fully developed. In fact, it is as children that we first develop our cognitive distortions. Do you remember all the rules you learned about gender roles growing up? If you were raised as a boy and knew that, quote-unquote, boys don't cry, an example of all or nothing thinking, then you may have felt shame or guilt when you did cry. We often carry these cognitive distortions from our childhoods into the present day. So what are some types of cognitive distortions? We'll review some of the most common cognitive distortions now. As we're reviewing these, see if you can recall a time when you experienced each type of cognitive distortion. 1. All or nothing thinking. All or nothing thoughts categorize the world into absolutes, leaving out the possibility of any gray area. For example, we might feel we can either love or hate something, but nothing in between. 2. Mind reading. When we mind read, we assume that somebody else is having certain thoughts about us. Anytime you've decided your partner, supervisor, or even just a person on the street is judging you, without consulting them to find out whether it's true, you're engaged in mind reading. 3. Catastrophizing. When you create a disaster scenario in your head based on little or no concrete evidence that the event will actually happen, you are catastrophizing. 4. Emotional reasoning. We engage in emotional reasoning when our thoughts are driven by our emotions, not objective facts. 5. Labeling. When you classify yourself as a categorically bad or unworthy person because of one event that happened, you're engaged in labeling. 6. Mental filtering. Cognitive distortions can be driven by focusing only on negative information and ignoring or devaluing positive information. 7. Overgeneralization. Similar to catastrophizing, overgeneralizing means expecting more bad things to happen because one negative event has happened. 8. Should statements. Thoughts based on the idea that the world, quote-unquote, should or shouldn't be a certain way are cognitive distortions. 9. Disqualifying the positive. When you dismiss positive things that have happened, you are distorting the way things are. What are some examples of cognitive distortions? All cognitive distortions can be damaging to personal well-being and social relationships. but each of us tends to lean towards either internalizing or externalizing types of cognitive distortions. Externalizing, or other-focused, cognitive distortions tend to harm our relationships and be more socially damaging. Here are a few examples. 1. Blame. Blaming is a cognitive distortion in which you believe that other people are at fault for something. The truth is that we all have ownership over our own feelings. We may want to blame our spouse when they forget our anniversary, or blame our coworker for taking credit for the work that we did. Ultimately, we are upset and believe that the other person caused our negative emotions. Regardless of others' actions, we are responsible for our emotions. And our blaming thoughts prevent us from acknowledging our true feelings and taking actions that might prevent us from having these feelings again in the future. For example, we might communicate how these actions made us feel and the actions we will take if the other person does this thing again. 2. Control. Controlling others is a behavior that comes from thought distortions related to our belief that we have the right to control others. For example, we might think that our solution to a problem is the best one, and so we give unsolicited advice in an attempt to control others' behavior. Or we might guilt trip someone to get them to do something we want. Or we might have a victim mentality that leads us to manipulate others into taking care of us, physically or emotionally. Controlling behaviors often arise from cognitive distortions related to feeling entitled to direct the actions or experiences of other people. 3. Bragging. Bragging about ourselves arises from a cognitive distortion that we are better or more valuable than others. We often brag to maintain our ego and its sense of superiority and to combat unconscious insecurity. Nevertheless, this distortion can lead to others feeling alienated by us and undervalued. So it's not hard to see how this may harm relationships. 4. Selfishness. Similar to bragging, selfishness arises from our ego. Our ego-based cognitive distortion that we deserve more than others can lead to selfish behavior and a lack of consideration for the needs of others. In addition to externalizing cognitive distortions, there are also internalizing or self-focused cognitive distortions. These may be thought of as the inverse of externalizing cognitive distortions because they are directed at the self. Let's discuss a few examples of these to learn more. 1. Self-blame. This cognitive distortion is exactly like blame, except the thought distortion is directed at ourselves. If our partner forgets our anniversary or our coworker takes credit for our work, thoughts emerge related to these experiences being our fault in some way. We think, perhaps, we offended our partner or we weren't assertive enough at work. Self-blame can be just as damaging as other blame, but it's turned inwards and erodes our self-esteem. To overcome self-blame, we can remind ourselves that just as we have ownership of our own feelings, others have ownership of their feelings. It's up to them to manage their feelings and for us to not always blame ourselves for their feelings. 2. People-pleasing. People-pleasing can be thought of as the inverse of controlling behavior. Here we have a cognitive distortion related to believing that other people have the right to control us. We might be easily manipulated or even voluntarily and unconsciously act in ways that please others, even if these actions go against our core values and needs. That's why bringing awareness to this cognitive distortion and undoing it can often be key to growing our well-being. 3. Putting ourselves down. Whether we put ourselves down in front of people or just inside our own heads, we do so because we have a cognitive distortion related to not being good enough in some way. Maybe we don't believe we are smart enough, attractive enough, thin enough, successful enough, etc. Determining the exact nature of these cognitive distortions takes self-awareness followed by effortful self-reprogramming. 4. Sacrificing our needs. It is healthy to put the needs of others first sometimes, especially when we are parents. However, chronically or constantly devaluing our needs suggests we have a cognitive distortion related to low self-worth. Perhaps we were taught that our needs should always come last, a common experience for many women in our culture. Or that we were not allowed to have certain needs, like the common cultural belief that men aren't allowed to cry. Our culture or upbringing can lead us to believe that we aren't allowed to have our needs, and this can be quite damaging to our well-being. So how do we overcome these cognitive distortions? Thankfully, we can use a technique called cognitive restructuring to undo the cognitive distortions that harm our well-being. Here's how to do it. Start by paying more attention to your thoughts and emotions. When you feel a negative emotion, see if you can identify the thought that caused it. Not all emotions are caused by thoughts, but you'll discover that most of your most difficult emotions do come from some type of cognitive distortion. Next, look for underlying beliefs. Did the thought arise from a belief? For example, if the thought said, "I'm weak," did it arise from a belief like, "Boys don't cry"? See if you can identify the related beliefs. Next, question the thought. Simply feeling like the thought is true isn't enough. What is the evidence that it is true? Would someone else who didn't have your beliefs and experiences think the thought is true? If you're thinking, "I'm a bad person," what is the evidence that this belief is false? In other words, what are the ways in which you are a good person? When we question the thoughts, we begin to see that there is very little concrete evidence to support them. Next, explore the origins of the thoughts and beliefs. Cognitive distortions usually emerge from parental or social programming. In other words, we were taught to think this way. Perhaps our parents ignored us when we got angry, or yelled at us when we didn't get straight A's, leading us to develop certain patterns of self-focused or other-focused thoughts. Seeing how our experiences shaped our thoughts and beliefs can sometimes help motivate us to let them go. Next, explore your relationship with the thought. Ask yourself how the thought might be different if you had different life experiences, if you were in a different situation, or if you were a different person. Why might you be attached to this thought while others are not? By recognizing that we fall into specific thought patterns, we can begin to consciously detach from them. And lastly, let go. After we thoroughly explore our cognitive distortions, they'll begin to loosen their grip. Now, each time we have a cognitive distortion, we'll see it and we can consciously let go, communicating with our unconscious mind that we are done with this belief and thought pattern. In time, these thought distortions can even dissolve completely. Cognitive distortions are a common challenge in our daily lives. Bringing awareness to these thoughts is like shining a light on the monster under your bed. In the light, it disappears and leaves you feeling more secure and centered. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and check out our free resources at berkeleywellbeing.com.